In just 30 years, one country dragged the entire planet into war. Not once. Twice. 2 world wars. 70 million people dead. Cities turned to ash on a scale humanity had never seen before or since. And both times, it started in the same place. Germany. Here's the part that should disturb you. Somewhere out there were men who fought in the trenches in 1916, came home, raised children, and then watched those same children march off to fight the exact same enemy 25 years later. The same border. The same fear. The same nightmare, run back a second time. Most people think the First World War and the Second World War were 2 separate stories. They weren't. They were one story with an intermission. And Germany's biggest mistake was never starting the First War. It was how the first one ended. So how does a single nation start 2 world wars in one human lifetime? To understand that, we have to go back to the moment Germany was even born. Because Germany was dangerous from the very first day it existed. 1871, the birth of a dangerous nation. Here's something that sounds impossible. Before 1871, Germany did not exist. Not as a country. Look at this map. See all these hundreds of little kingdoms, duchies, and city-states scattered across the middle of Europe? That was the German-speaking world. Dozens of tiny rulers, all speaking the same language, all refusing to be in the same country. Then one man decided to fix that. His name was Otto von Bismarck, and he was possibly the most ruthless political genius of the entire century. Bismarck ran the biggest of these states, Prussia, a place that was basically an army with a country attached to it. And he had a plan to unite all the Germans under Prussia's control. Not with speeches. Not with handshakes. With wars. Bismarck picked 3 short, brutal, perfectly timed wars, won every single one, and used the victories to scare and flatter the other German states into joining him. The final boss was France. In 1871, Prussia crushed the French army so badly that Bismarck declared the new German Empire in a French palace, just to twist the knife. Otto, the French are furious. We declared our country in their palace. Yes. That was the idea. They're saying it's humiliating. It is. That's why I did it. Should we apologize? Bismarck does not apologize. Bismarck annexes. And just like that, overnight, a brand new country appeared in the center of Europe. Look at this map. See this enormous block right in the middle? That's the new Germany. Bigger than France. More people than France. And suddenly it had the best army on the entire continent. Europe had spent centuries balanced between rival powers. Now there was a giant sitting right in the middle of the table, and everyone else was nervous. But here's the thing about Bismarck. He was dangerous, but he wasn't reckless. He knew Germany was surrounded by enemies on all sides, so he spent the next 20 years building a web of alliances designed to keep the peace and keep France isolated. He was playing a careful, brilliant game. The problem was that Bismarck would not run Germany forever. And the man who came next was about to throw the entire game board into the air. 1890, the Kaiser fires Bismarck. In 1888, Germany got a new ruler. His name was Kaiser Wilhelm II, and he was, to put it gently, a disaster waiting to happen. Wilhelm was proud, loud, insecure, and convinced he was a military genius despite having never won anything. He had a withered arm from birth, which he was deeply self-conscious about, and he overcompensated by acting like the toughest man in every room he walked into. Wilhelm looked at old, careful Bismarck and decided the man was holding Germany back. So in 1890 he fired him. He pushed out the one person who had kept Europe stable for 2 decades, and he did it because he wanted the glory for himself. Your Majesty, are you sure about firing Bismarck? He's old. He's cautious. Germany needs to be bold. He's the reason we have peace. Peace is boring. I want greatness. And how do we get greatness? A bigger navy. A bigger empire. And a much bigger hat. Wilhelm threw away Bismarck's careful alliances. The treaty keeping Russia friendly? He let it lapse. So Russia did the one thing Bismarck had spent his whole life preventing. It allied with France. Look at this map. Now Germany had a hostile France on one side and a hostile Russia on the other. Surrounded. Exactly the nightmare Bismarck had worked 20 years to avoid, undone in a few years of ego. Then Wilhelm made it worse. He decided Germany needed a gigantic navy to rival Britain, the most powerful naval empire on earth. Britain had never cared much about Germany before. But a German fleet being built specifically to challenge them? That got their attention fast. Britain started building too, and a deadly naval arms race kicked off. One by one, Wilhelm had turned every major power in Europe against his own country. The fuse was now soaked in gasoline. All it needed was a spark. 1914. The spark. By 1914, Europe was split into two armed camps glaring at each other. On one side, Germany and Austria-Hungary. On the other, France, Russia, and Britain. Every country had massive armies, detailed war plans, and a hair-trigger alliance system where if one country went to war, they all did. It was a row of dominoes the size of a continent, just waiting for the first one to fall. The first domino fell in a city called Sarajevo. A man named Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, was visiting when a young assassin shot him and his wife. It was a regional crime in a corner of Europe most people couldn't find on a map. It should have stayed small. Instead, the alliance system turned a street corner murder into the deadliest war in human history up to that point. Austria blamed Serbia and wanted revenge. Germany told Austria, "Go for it, we've got your back." Russia backed Serbia. France backed Russia. And Germany had a war plan that required attacking France first by marching through neutral Belgium, which dragged in Britain. In about 5 weeks, one assassination became a continental war. Sir, Austria wants to punish Serbia. Should we support them? Of course. They're our ally. But if we support Austria, Russia gets involved. Then we deal with Russia. And France is allied with Russia. Then we deal with France too. And to attack France we go through Belgium, which means Britain, you know what? Let's just fight everyone. That's almost literally what happened. Germany's master plan was to knock out France fast in the west, then turn around and deal with slow Russia in the east. A quick, glorious war. Everyone said it would be over by Christmas. Remember that line. It's going to come back. 1916, the meat grinder. The fast war never came. Germany's army stormed into France, got within sight of Paris, and then got stopped cold. Both sides dug trenches, long ditches in the dirt, and faced off across a strip of shell-blasted wasteland called No Man's Land. And there they stayed. For years. Look at this map. See this line snaking from the coast of Belgium all the way down to Switzerland? That's the Western Front. For almost 4 years, that line barely moved. Men lived in mud, rats, and disease. To attack meant climbing out of the trench and running straight into machine guns, barbed wire, and artillery. Tens of thousands of men could die to capture a few hundred yards of mud that would be lost again the next week. At a single battle called the Somme, the British lost nearly 60,000 men in one day. One day. At Verdun, the French and Germans bled each other for 10 straight months for almost no gain at all. This wasn't war like anyone had imagined. It was industrial slaughter, and Germany was trapped in the middle of it, fighting on 2 fronts at once, exactly like Bismarck had warned. General, the new offensive. How much ground did we take? About 200 yards, sir. Excellent. And the cost? 40,000 men. For 200 yards? On the bright side, it's a very nice 200 yards. Germany was strong, but it couldn't win a war of pure attrition. It was one country against a coalition that had more men, more money, and a global empire to draw from. Britain's navy blockaded German ports, and slowly the German people back home started to starve. By 1917, things were getting desperate. And then Germany made the mistake that sealed its fate. 1918, defeat and the stab in the back. Germany was hungry and losing, so it gambled. It started sinking any ship heading for Britain, including American ones, hoping to choke Britain out before America got angry enough to act. It did not work. In 1917, the United States declared war on Germany and started shipping over fresh troops, fresh guns, and endless supplies. For an exhausted Germany, that was the beginning of the end. By the autumn of 1918, the German army was breaking. The soldiers were starving, the country was on the edge of revolution, and the generals secretly knew the war was lost. So Germany asked for a ceasefire. On November 11, 1918, the guns finally went silent. The First World War was over. Around 17 million people were dead. But here is the single most important thing in this entire video. Pay attention, because this is where the seed of the Second War gets planted. When Germany surrendered, its army was still standing on foreign soil. No enemy soldier had marched into Germany itself. To the ordinary German on the street, it didn't look like they'd been beaten. It looked like they'd been betrayed. We surrendered? But we were still winning, weren't we? Not really. We were starving and surrounded. But the enemy never even reached our cities. True, but so who surrendered? Who stabbed us in the back? Nobody stabbed us, the army was collapsed. No. Somebody betrayed us. I'm sure of it. That feeling had a name. The stab in the back myth. The poisonous lie that Germany's brave army was never truly defeated, that it was betrayed from within by politicians, by communists, by traitors. It was false. Germany lost because it ran out of men, food, and allies. But millions of bitter, humiliated Germans wanted someone to blame, and a young corporal who'd been gassed in the trenches was listening very, very carefully. Remember him. He's coming back. And if you're finding this interesting, do me a favor and subscribe, because from here on out, every single decision somehow makes things worse. 1919, the treaty that guaranteed round 2 in 1919, the winners gathered in the Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris, to decide Germany's punishment. And France, which had been invaded by Germany twice in 50 years, wanted Germany crushed so badly it could never rise again. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, and it was a masterpiece of how to lose a peace. Germany lost huge chunks of land. Look at this map. See these territories getting carved off the edges? Gone. Its army was capped at a tiny 100,000 men. It lost all its overseas colonies. It was banned from having tanks, submarines, or an air force. And worst of all, it was forced to sign a clause accepting total blame for the entire war, and then handed a bill for reparations so enormous it would take until the year 2010 to pay off. So we have to pay for the whole war? Yes. Even the parts that weren't our fault? All of it. And admit it was entirely our doing? Sign here, please. This is going to make everyone in Germany furious for a generation. Sounds like a future problem. It was the worst of both worlds. The treaty was harsh enough to enrage every single German, but not harsh enough to actually keep Germany down permanently. It humiliated a proud nation without destroying its potential. And it handed every angry German a ready-made story. We weren't beaten, we were betrayed, and then we were robbed at Versailles. You could not have designed a better recruiting tool for extremists if you tried. The wound was open. Now something needed to come along and make it unbearable. 1923, a country that broke that something arrived in 1923. To pay its crushing debts, the German government did the one thing you should never do. It just started printing money. Mountains of it. And when you print endless money, that money becomes worthless fast. This is called hyperinflation, and what happened in Germany became one of the most insane economic collapses in history. Prices didn't just rise. They exploded. A loaf of bread that cost a couple of marks before the war cost 200 billion marks. People were paid twice a day and ran to spend it immediately because by the evening it would be worth half as much. Money became so worthless that people burned banknotes in their stoves because cash was cheaper than firewood. Children played with bricks of cash in the street. "I'd like to buy one loaf of bread, please." "That'll be 200 billion marks." "Here's a wheelbarrow full of cash. This is only enough for half a loaf." "But I filled an entire wheelbarrow." "Prices doubled while you were standing in line, sir." "Fine. Keep the wheelbarrow, it's worth more than the money." Imagine your life savings, the money you worked 30 years for, becoming worth less than the paper it was printed on, in a matter of months. That's what happened to millions of ordinary, hard-working German families. Doctors, teachers, shopkeepers, wiped out. They had survived the war, survived the humiliation, and now their entire future had been erased. They were terrified, furious, and desperate. And desperate people go looking for someone who promises to make the pain stop. They were about to find him. 1933. The angry man walks in. Remember that gassed corporal from the trenches? His name was Adolf Hitler. After the war, he joined a tiny, angry political party and discovered he had one terrifying talent. He could stand in front of a crowd of broken, humiliated people and give their rage a target. He told them everything they desperately wanted to hear. "You weren't defeated in the war," he said, "you were stabbed in the back. Versailles was a crime. Your suffering isn't your fault, it's theirs. And I, alone, can make Germany great and powerful and proud again." To a nation that had lost a war, lost its savings, and lost its pride, it was the most intoxicating sales pitch imaginable. For a while, in the 1920s, when the economy briefly recovered, almost nobody listened to him. He even tried to seize power by force and ended up in prison, looking like a failed clown. But then, in 1929, a massive economic depression swept the entire world, and Germany was hit harder than anyone. Millions lost their jobs overnight. And suddenly, the angry man with the simple answers didn't sound so crazy. Times are hard. Who do we vote for? Well, there's a man who blames all our problems on someone else. Go on. He says everything bad is the fault of traitors and foreigners. That does sound appealing when I'm hungry and scared. He also promises jobs, pride, and revenge. You know what? Sign me up. People don't turn to extremists when life is good. They turn to them when they're desperate and someone offers them a villain to hate and a dream to believe in. By 1933, Hitler's party was the biggest in Germany, and he was legally appointed chancellor. Within months he'd smashed the democracy, banned every other party, and made himself absolute dictator. The most dangerous man of the century now controlled the most dangerous nation in Europe. And he had no intention of obeying the rules of Versailles. 1939, doing it again. Hitler immediately started tearing up the Treaty of Versailles, piece by piece. He rebuilt the army far beyond the legal limit. He built tanks, submarines, and an air force, all banned. He marched troops into the forbidden zone on the French border. And the rest of Europe, exhausted and terrified of another war like 1914, did almost nothing. They just hoped that if they gave Hitler a little of what he wanted, he'd be satisfied and stop. This was called appeasement, and it was a catastrophe. Sir, Germany is rebuilding its army. That's illegal. Yes, but if we object, it might mean war. So we do nothing? Let's just hope he stops on his own. He just took over Austria. Surely that's enough for him. Now he wants part of Czechoslovakia. Give it to him. Then he'll definitely stop. He took the whole country. He seems like a future problem. Every time the world backed down, Hitler grew bolder. He swallowed Austria, then Czechoslovakia, each time promising it was his very last demand. It never was. Then, in September 1939, he invaded Poland. And this time, Britain and France had finally had enough. They declared war. Just 20 years after the war that was supposed to end all wars, the whole nightmare started again. The same country. The same enemies. Even some of the same generals. And here's the dark genius of it. Hitler had learned from 1914. Last time, Germany got stuck in the trenches because it was too slow. So this time, Germany attacked with terrifying speed. Tanks and planes punching through enemy lines before they could even react. They called it Blitzkrieg, lightning war. France, which had held out for 4 brutal years in the First World War, collapsed in just 6 weeks in the Second. For a moment, it looked like Germany had finally cracked the code. It hadn't. Because the pattern wasn't done repeating yet. 1945, the same ending, bigger for about 2 years, Germany looked unstoppable. It conquered most of Europe. But then Hitler made the exact same mistakes that had doomed Germany the first time, just bigger. Mistake 1. He invaded the Soviet Union, opening up a massive second front in the east. A two-front war. The precise nightmare Bismarck had spent his whole life avoiding, and that had crushed Germany in the First World War. Hitler walked straight back into it on purpose. Mistake 2. He declared war on the United States, dragging the most powerful industrial economy on Earth into the fight against him. Again. Just like 1917. And just like before, the math was impossible. Germany was one country trying to fight the Soviet Union, the British Empire, and the United States all at the same time. No amount of lightning war could beat those odds forever. Mein Frère, the Soviets aren't surrendering. And it's getting cold. Push harder. We're also now at war with America. Why would we do that? You declared it, sir. That seems like something Germany has tried before. Twice now, actually. And how did it go the other times? You don't want to know, sir. The German army that had conquered Europe in lightning strikes slowly got ground down between the Soviets in the east and the Americans and British in the west. The same vice. The same two-front trap. By 1945, enemy soldiers were finally marching through the streets of Berlin, the thing that hadn't happened in the First World War. Hitler killed himself in a bunker as his 1,000-year empire collapsed in 12 years. Germany surrendered again. But this time the cost was almost unimaginable. Around 50 million people dead, whole cities erased, and a horror called the Holocaust that the world would never be able to forget. So why did Germany start 2 world wars in 30 years? Here's the real answer, and it's not what most people think. It wasn't because Germans were uniquely evil. It was a chain reaction. A nation born too strong, too fast, surrounded by enemies. A reckless leader who threw away the careful peace. A brutal war it couldn't win. And then, the real poison, a defeat so humiliating and a peace so vengeful that it created the perfect conditions for an even angrier, even more dangerous regime to rise from the ashes. The First World War didn't end the conflict. It just paused it for 20 years while a wounded, bitter nation looked for someone to blame. The Treaty of Versailles didn't stop the next war. It practically guaranteed it. That's the lesson the world finally learned in 1945. When the Second World War ended, the winners did the opposite of Versailles. They rebuilt Germany instead of crushing it. And Germany never started a world war again. 2 wars, 30 years, one unbroken chain of cause and effect. But if you really want to understand how the world got this dangerous, you have to go back to the man who started it all, Bismarck, and the empire he built. Click here, the story gets even crazier, and I'll catch you next time.